A police officer, driven by racial prejudice, unexpectedly stopped a black man's car and forced him to the station on baseless charges. What the officer didn't expect, however, was that the man was a CIA agent. In an instant, the situation flipped, leaving everyone stunned. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to our channel to join us for thrilling stories you won't want to miss. James Walker sat in an unmarked car, the engine off, the window slightly cracked to let in the warm afternoon breeze. The small street was in a quiet residential neighborhood with uniform houses, white picket fences, and neatly trimmed lawns. From his parking spot, James could see straight to the house at the end of the cul-de-sac, where he had been monitoring for hours. The person living in that house was the target of a federal operation. Matthew Kerr, a high-tech expert under investigation for his suspected involvement in an international criminal network. Intelligence reports indicated that Kerr had developed a type of malware designed to attack national infrastructure. James was assigned to monitor the situation before an action team executed the arrest warrant. The afternoon sun bathed the neighborhood, but James remained focused on the house ahead, his senses heightened with tension. James felt a simmering anxiety in his chest, reminding him of a past incident where he was stopped because of racial bias, even after explaining that he was a federal agent. Despite this, he restrained himself, not letting his emotions interfere with the mission. Tom Mitchell, a patrol officer in the area, was driving through the quiet streets. An experienced officer, Tom was familiar with every road and vehicle of the residents here. He prided himself on knowing every corner and person in the neighborhood. A past incident, when a dangerous criminal slipped away right under his nose, had made Tom particularly vigilant. Since then, he vowed never to let anything get out of hand again. James's car, simple in appearance but without a license plate, immediately caught Tom's attention. He slowed down, his gaze cautious. Through the window, he saw a black man sitting inside, his face focused but calm. Tom furrowed his brow. This man was unlike any resident in the neighborhood he had known. What is he doing here? Tom wondered, suspicion beginning to form in his mind. Tom recalled the time when he had let a dangerous criminal escape, a moment that had made him especially cautious from then on. Tom drove down the peaceful street, but something about today left him uneasy. The unmarked car parked at the end of the cul-de-sac immediately caught his attention. It wasn't a flashy or luxurious car, but its simplicity made it stand out in a neighborhood where everything was meticulously maintained. Inside the car, a black man sat silently, his face showing nothing but focus. His eyes weren't darting around like someone looking for an address. Instead, they were fixed on the house at the end of the street. Tom squinted, and a sense of suspicion immediately arose. He didn't recognize the man, and he was certain he had never seen this car before. A flood of unwelcome memories returned. The last time he ignored his instincts, a dangerous smuggler had escaped right before his eyes. Back then, Tom had faced sharp criticism from his colleagues, leaving him haunted by the thought that any sign, no matter how small, could be the start of a significant threat. "I'm not letting that happen again," he muttered to himself, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. Just then, the patrol car's radio crackled to life. "Unit 24. We've received a call from a resident on Maple Drive. There's an unfamiliar car and a suspicious man parked at the end of the street. Please check it out." Tom glanced back at the car ahead. A coincidence, or perhaps not. A voice inside him urged, "This is a clear sign, not something to ignore." Picking up the radio, he replied, his voice steady but with a trace of tension. "Unit 24 responding. I'm at the location. Will report back shortly." As he turned off the radio, Tom slowly drove closer to James's car, keeping enough distance to avoid drawing immediate attention. He stopped, observing through the rearview mirror. The man in the car remained motionless, as if entirely unaware of Tom's presence. Tom had learned that the most dangerous individuals were the ones who knew how to stay calm. Everything he saw fit the profile of a potential threat in his mind. A stranger, an unmarked car, someone who didn't match the area's demographics, intently watching a house without any apparent reason. Tom stepped out of his patrol car, standing tall to prominently display his badge on his chest. He adjusted his belt and the radio on his shoulder, mentally running through how he'd handle the situation. The initial questions, a watchful gaze, and, if necessary, an assertion of authority. This was how he believed he could maintain control. Yet, deep down, a small voice wondered if he was overreacting or simply letting his past dictate his actions. Tom didn't let that thought linger. He began walking toward the unmarked car, each step heavy with suspicion and the weight of his past failures. Tom Mitchell moved slowly toward the unmarked car. His eyes scanned the quiet street, where everything seemed perfectly normal. Lush green lawns, pristine white fences, and not a soul in sight. But Tom knew that the most unusual things often hid just beneath the surface of such tranquility. He approached the car, maintaining a safe distance, and knocked firmly on the window with his knuckles. The sound echoed through the still air like a declaration. "I'm here, and I'm watching you." The man inside raised his head, his gaze calm yet piercing. He wasn't surprised to see Tom. With deliberate slowness, he lowered the window slightly, revealing a sharp-featured face and intensely focused eyes. "Good afternoon." Tom began, his voice low and professional but tinged with firmness. "What are you doing here?" The man straightened in his seat, keeping his hands on the steering wheel, his expression steady. "I'm on duty," he replied, his tone calm but authoritative. "I'm with a federal agency. This is official business." Tom frowned. He didn't like the man's answer. Too composed, too confident, as though he believed he was beyond Tom's jurisdiction. "Federal agency?" Tom repeated, infusing his tone with skepticism. "Mind explaining the kind of duty you're on?" James Walker sighed lightly, maintaining his composure. "I'm not at liberty to disclose details, but I've been ordered to conduct surveillance here. If you need verification, my credentials are in the glove compartment." Tom glanced past James, his eyes instinctively drawn to the house at the end of the street, the same house James had briefly glanced at while speaking. Tom sensed a flicker of tension in that fleeting movement. A thought flashed in his mind. He's hiding something. "What's your connection to that house?" Tom asked, his tone sharpening. He stepped closer, his hand hovering near his belt where his gun rested. James didn't immediately answer. He looked at Tom for a long, tense moment. In his mind, worst-case scenarios played out. His mission was being interrupted. He couldn't let this escalate further. "There's no connection to the house," James said, striving to keep his voice calm. "I'm just doing my job. If you check my credentials, everything will be clear." But Tom wasn't convinced. He had heard explanations like this before, from suspicious individuals trying to cover their tracks. "You seem interested in that house," Tom remarked, scrutinizing James's every expression. "If you've got nothing to hide, why not cooperate from the start?" James felt his patience wearing thin, but he knew that any rash move could make things worse. He took a deep breath, keeping his tone steady. "I am cooperating. I've told you, my credentials are in the glove compartment. Just check them." Still, Tom didn't budge. The silence between the two stretched, broken only by the hum of the patrol car's idling engine. The tension in the air became palpable. Tom felt the need to assert control before the situation spiraled out of hand. "Step out of the car," Tom ordered, his voice no longer a suggestion, but a firm command. James met Tom's gaze, weighing his options. He could refuse, but that would only escalate the matter. With a slow nod, he opened the door and stepped out, his movements deliberate, trying to keep everything under control. Tom Mitchell stepped back slightly, his eyes fixed on James. His hand hovered near his gun, the familiar warning from his past echoing in his mind. Be wary of those who seem confident. They're often the most dangerous. James Walker stood outside the car, his hand still visible, his demeanor calm yet resolute. Tom Mitchell faced him, his eyes scrutinizing every small movement of the man in front of him. The distance between them was only a few steps, but it felt like an invisible wall had been erected, the tension poised to erupt. "So what now?" Tom asked, his voice cold. "Can you explain more about this federal mission you're on? Or are you planning to keep dodging the question?" "I've already told you," James replied, his tone unchanged. "I'm with the Central Intelligence Agency. This mission is classified, but if you check my papers in the glove compartment, everything will be clear." "Papers in the glove compartment," Tom repeated, emphasizing each word as if they were nothing more than a cheap excuse. "Do you think I'm just going to take your word for it?" The skepticism in Tom's voice wasn't surface level. It was the result of lingering memories of a past failure when he had let a suspect slip away because he didn't act quickly enough. He could feel his authority being challenged, not by violence, but by the unnerving calmness of James. As the tension hung thick in the air, a soft engine hum broke the silence. Tom quickly glanced down the street and saw a silver sedan slowly cruising through the neighborhood. James's eyes, though never leaving Tom, briefly flickered to the car. It was only a fleeting moment, but it was enough for Tom to notice. "What are you looking at?" Tom asked, his voice full of suspicion. James maintained his composure, but internally his anxiety was rising. That was the accomplice's car, he thought. The license plate and description matched the intel from the operation. If they realized that they were being watched or detected in the presence of law enforcement, the mission could be compromised. "That car," James said, his voice sharpening slightly. "It might be connected to my mission. You should note down the license plate." But Tom didn't budge. "Don't try to change the subject," he said, almost ignoring James's warning. "Are you trying to distract me? If that car is really important, why haven't you reported it to your agency?" James suppressed his frustration. "I can't do that right now. This mission requires utmost secrecy, and I can't let you jeopardize it. Just note down the license plate, and I'll explain later." But Tom didn't trust him. In his eyes, James was only trying to stall or hide something. The memories of past deceitful suspects resurfaced, along with his stubbornness about maintaining control. "No one gets the better of me again," he thought. "You're not the one making the rules here," Tom replied, his tone colder. "I'm the one who decides what needs to be done." Tom's hand hovered near his holstered gun, a gesture that immediately made James aware that the situation could spiral out of control. He knew he couldn't let things escalate further, but he also couldn't completely capitulate to Tom's ignorance. "You don't need to do that," James said, trying to keep his tone conciliatory. "I am cooperating. I've provided the information. You just need to check my papers, and everything will become clear." "Your papers could be fake," Tom said, the skepticism growing. He couldn't shake the feeling that James wasn't just some random guy in the wrong place. He was a part of something bigger, something that he needed to stop. While the two continued to spar verbally, the silver sedan disappeared from view. A sense of failure crept into James's chest. "I'm wasting valuable time," he thought. This mission wasn't just about protecting his honor, It was part of a much larger operation where every second mattered. But there was nothing he could do except remain calm. The escalation in Tom's attitude was heading towards something worse if James didn't handle it carefully. He needed to find a way to defuse the situation without compromising his mission. Meanwhile, Tom felt the tension inside himself rise. His instincts told him that James was dangerous, but deep down, a small voice wondered, "Am I making a mistake?" However, his stubbornness and need for control kept him from stopping. He couldn't allow himself to be at a disadvantage, not this time. James Walker stood still, his gaze calm, yet carrying an urgency that was hard to conceal. He knew that every second passing was an opportunity slipping away. But facing Tom Mitchell, a suspicious police officer, every effort to keep the situation stable felt like hitting a thick wall of distrust. Tom took another step forward, his eyes never leaving James. His hand moved slowly towards the handcuffs on his belt, a gesture as clear as a warning. "All right, you've had your chance to explain," Tom said, his tone no longer patient. "But I haven't heard anything convincing. Put your hands behind your back." "You're making a serious mistake," James said, trying to keep his voice calm but firm. "I've told you, I'm a federal agent. This mission involves an extremely sensitive operation. Not only are you disrupting my work, but you're also putting a much larger operation at risk." These words only made Tom more skeptical. "A federal operation," he repeated, emphasizing each word with mockery. "Is that the best excuse you've got? If you're an agent, you should have cooperated from the start, instead of making me waste my time." James took a deep breath, trying to control the growing feeling of helplessness. "Listen to me. I don't want things to escalate. But if you continue, you're going to have to explain to the government why you sabotaged a top-secret mission." Tom sneered, a smile full of disdain. In his mind, James was just a skilled liar trying to mess things up to cover the truth. Tom's stubbornness came not only from his suspicion, but also from an unshakable need to control every situation. "I can't let another con man get the better of me," he thought. "Put your hands behind your back." Tom repeated, his voice now no longer a request but a command. James knew he had no other option. If he resisted, the situation would only worsen, and that would not only endanger him but the entire mission. With a cold, sharp look, he slowly placed his hands behind his back, trying to maintain as much control as possible in a situation where he had none. But inside, a wave of frustration began to rise. His eyes scanned Tom, the man standing there, self-assured and suspicious. James wanted to scream. "Do you even know what you're doing? I've had to work twice, even 3 times as hard to get here today. Every day I have to prove I deserve my position, and now you just need one glance to deny all of that." But he swallowed the words. He knew that showing these emotions would only make things worse. Instead, James took a deep breath, his eyes still holding restraint. "I've told you," James repeated, his voice now more composed than ever. But in his eyes, a flicker of disappointment flashed, a light that Tom didn't catch. Tom quickly stepped forward, the cold metal cuffs snapping tightly around James's wrists with a sharp click. A sense of power surged through Tom, but it wasn't satisfaction. It was a rigid confirmation that he had done the right thing. "You're making a mistake," James said, this time his voice low but certain. "And you'll have to face the consequences." Tom ignored the warning, gripping James's arm and leading him toward the patrol car. But as he opened the door to place James in the back seat, James's eyes quickly darted to the house he had been surveilling all day. A shadow passed by the window. The suspect. "Look," James exclaimed, his voice more urgent than ever. "That's my target. He's about to leave the house. If you leave me here, You'll let a dangerous man escape." Tom didn't turn around. He wasn't about to let James take control of the situation, and in his mind, James's words were just another psychological trick. "I'm not falling for your game," Tom said, slamming the car door shut. "Sit still." "Tom, listen to me," James nearly shouted, no longer able to keep his composure. "If you don't act now, it'll be too late." But Tom turned his back and walked toward the driver's seat with a hard expression. Inside, he had a brief moment of doubt, a flicker of light that maybe James was telling the truth. But the fear of losing control and letting a con man get the better of him overwhelmed everything. He sat in the car, not sparing James a single glance. From the back seat, James felt helpless as the suspect disappeared, but he kept his calm to avoid making things worse. As James sat handcuffed in the patrol car, the space became suffocating. He remained silent, his eyes staring out the window, but inside a wave of anger and helplessness surged. He couldn't believe he was being obstructed by the very people who were supposed to assist in his mission. But James knew well that any emotional outburst now would only be misinterpreted. Meanwhile, Tom sat at the wheel, his hands gripping the steering wheel. A strange feeling crept into his chest. Not the feeling of victory, but unease. James's words echoed in Tom's mind. "You're making a serious mistake." But Tom didn't allow himself to waver. "I'm doing the right thing," he reassured himself. He's got nothing to prove but his words. When they arrived at the police station, a strange atmosphere immediately settled in. Other officers in the station looked at James with curious and surprised glances, while Tom maintained a hard expression as he escorted him through the hallway. James didn't speak, but his gaze was unwavering, exuding an unsettling confidence that made a few people whisper to each other. Tom led James into the interrogation room, but before he could ask a single question, the voice from the dispatch center crackled through the radio. "Tom, stop everything. You've just arrested Agent James Walker of the CIA, an executive agent on an active mission. Release him immediately and return to report." Tom froze, shock evident on his face. He looked at James for the first time, seeing hesitation in his eyes. "CIA?" he repeated, almost disbelieving. James didn't respond, simply adjusting his wrist, still marked by the cuffs, his gaze cold but devoid of anger. He simply said, "Do your job." Tom Mitchell gripped the steering wheel tightly as the patrol car rolled down the quiet street. Everything around him seemed to fade away, leaving only the heavy silence inside the vehicle. James Walker, hands cuffed, sat quietly in the back seat, staring straight out the window. His calm demeanor didn't ease the tension in the air. It only made Tom more uncomfortable. How could he stay so composed? Tom wondered. A liar or something bigger? Tom reached for the radio, his voice carrying an air of overconfidence, as though asserting it would reinforce his belief that he was in the right. "Unit 24 reporting," Tom said, keeping his tone steady. "Detained a black male suspect in an unmarked vehicle on Maple Drive. The individual claims to be a federal agent but has no identification. Currently en route to the station for processing." On the other end, the line went silent for a few seconds. It was an unusual pause, long enough for a faint unease to creep into Tom's mind. He glanced into the rearview mirror, seeing James still seated calmly, his expression betraying no emotion. His eyes, however, seemed expectant, as if he already knew what was coming. Finally, the voice on the radio returned, but it wasn't the familiar tone Tom expected. Instead, it carried a firmness and authority that instinctively made him sit up straighter. "Unit 24. Confirm the name of the suspect," the dispatch voice said, slowly, deliberately. Tom furrowed his brow but answered decisively. "James Walker. no identification, claims to be CIA. Another long silence followed, this one so heavy it felt as though it was pressing down on Tom. He could feel the confidence in his voice starting to waver. His grip on the radio tightened, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. What's going on? Why are they hesitating so much? Then the dispatch voice came back, this time carrying an urgency rarely heard. Unit 24, repeat. James Walker is a CIA agent on a classified mission. You've just detained a federal agent. Release him immediately and cease any interference. We will handle this from here. The words hit Tom like a punch to the chest. His head spun his thoughts in chaos. CIA? A federal agent? How? Dispatch, confirm that, Tom said, his voice now stripped of its earlier confidence, trembling slightly. He's CIA? Confirmed, the voice replied, leaving no room for doubt. You've interfered with a critical operation. Release him immediately and prepare to report to your superiors. Tom couldn't say anything else. The radio slipped from his hand, landing on the seat beside him with a soft clack. In the rearview mirror, James's eyes met his. There was no anger or defiance in them, just an almost unnerving calmness, as though James had been waiting for this moment. Before Tom could fully process the situation, his eyes were drawn to the end of the street, where the house James had been surveilling all day stood. He suddenly noticed something unusual. The front door was wide open, and a man hurried out carrying a large bag. He headed straight for a silver car parked on the street. As James was released from his cuffs, he didn't say a word to Tom. He merely adjusted his wrists, still red and marked from the handcuffs, his expression quiet yet powerful. James knew that letting anger take over would only waste more time. But inside, a wave of disappointment washed over him, not just with Tom, but with the system he was trying so hard to serve. Tom stood frozen, regret heavy in the air, but unable to bring himself to apologize. He knew this mistake wouldn't be easily forgiven. James got back into his car, exhaling a small breath of relief, but keeping his focus sharp. In the rare quiet moments after a mission, he double-checked his surveillance equipment. "Damn it," Tom muttered under his breath, the guilt quickly replaced by panic. It's the suspect. That man is the one James was after. That's him, isn't it? Tom turned, his voice rough with tension. The one leaving the house. That's your target? James nodded, his eyes fixed on the silver car. That's right, he said, his voice steady but laced with urgency. And now he's about to get away, thanks to your delay. Tom almost leapt out of the driver's seat, but he didn't know what to do next. Everything seemed to collapse around him. His mistake, his arrogance, and now the consequences. He grabbed the radio, but the dispatch voice still echoed in his mind, reminding him of the damage he had caused. What have I done? Is there any way to fix this? But time wasn't waiting for him. James turned to him, his gaze sharp as a blade. If you hesitate any longer, he'll be gone for good. This will be far worse than just arresting the wrong person. Tom took a deep breath and grabbed the radio. His voice was hoarse as he spoke. Dispatch, I need immediate assistance. The primary suspect is leaving the scene. Send backup now. As the silver car disappeared, Tom knew the situation had spiraled out of control. He hadn't just arrested the wrong person. He had also indirectly given a dangerous man the opportunity to escape. A crushing sense of helplessness engulfed him, leaving behind a pain he knew would haunt him for years to come. Tom Mitchell quickly stopped the car by the side of the road, his breath heavy as though the weight of his recent mistake was pressing down on his chest. The radio beside him continued to broadcast instructions from dispatch, but now the sound was just a vague background noise in his chaotic mind. What have I done? How did everything escalate like this? He turned to look at James Walker through the rearview mirror. The handcuffed man in the back seat still wore his calm demeanor, but his gaze was no longer directed at Tom. His eyes were fixed out the window towards the street where the suspect's car had just vanished. The urgency in his gaze served as a reminder that time was running out. Tom swallowed hard, his hands trembling as he opened the car door and stepped out. He hurried around to the back of the vehicle and faced James. I'm sorry," Tom said, his voice shrinking as he looked into James's cold yet controlled eyes. "I didn't know who you were. I didn't mean to interfere with your work. I was just doing my duty." James didn't respond immediately. He studied Tom for a moment, his gaze seeming to pierce through the excuses. "Unlock these cuffs," he said, his voice low but sharp. "We don't have time." Tom hastily pulled out the key, his hands still shaking as he unlocked the cuffs. The sound of the click echoed, like the tolling of a bell signaling the end of his disastrous mistake. But Tom knew the consequences were still ahead. James rubbed his wrists gently, the red marks visible, but he showed no anger. Instead, he stepped out of the car with the determination of someone who knew exactly what needed to be done next. "You weren't listening," James said, his eyes lingering on Tom's bewildered face. His voice wasn't loud, but each word felt weighty. "I told you from the start that I'm a federal agent, that I'm on a mission. But instead of listening, you let your prejudices guide you. And now, my suspect is gone." "James, Tom began, but James raised a hand to stop him. "There's no time for apologies," James said curtly, his eyes now fixed on the road. "Want to make things right? Do your job, call for backup, and block all exits from this area. I'll continue with my mission." Before Tom could respond, James sprinted toward his unmarked vehicle. He opened the door and quickly checked the surveillance equipment inside, his eyes scanning the screens to track the suspect's movements. The system was still functioning, but time was running out. Tom stood frozen, overwhelmed by a sense of helplessness and guilt. But James's words snapped him back to reality. "I need to do something. I can't let it end like this." He quickly grabbed the radio, his voice more frantic than ever. "Dispatch, this is Unit 24. I need immediate assistance. The primary suspect has left Maple Drive and may be heading north. Lock down nearby routes and send additional units to assist with the pursuit." The dispatch voice responded, firm but urgent. "Acknowledged. Unit 24. Neighboring units are being deployed. Continue monitoring and report your location." Tom exhaled, feeling like he'd done a small part to fix his mistake, but the regret still weighed heavily on him. He looked back at James, who had already gotten into his car, his focus entirely on the mission. The engine roared to life, and, in an instant, the vehicle sped off, disappearing at the end of the street. Tom stood there, a sense of emptiness overwhelming everything else. He knew that James would carry on with his mission, without any help from him, because trust had been lost. The price he would pay wasn't just the consequences of this mistake, but the painful realization that he had ruined the chance to work with someone who was truly fighting for something much bigger than himself. Tom Mitchell walked into the police station with slow, heavy steps, as if dragging the weight of his recent mistake. His footsteps echoed down the quiet hallway, a space usually filled with the chatter and laughter of colleagues. But today, everything was different. The gazes of his co-workers no longer held their usual respect, but instead sharp, questioning looks. The murmurs were too low for Tom to hear distinctly, but loud enough for him to feel judged. With each step, Tom's heartbeat quickened, as if forewarning him of something even worse than he had imagined. At the end of the hallway, the door to Captain Roger. Hill's office stood slightly ajar, the light spilling through, creating a long streak on the floor, a boundary Tom knew he couldn't avoid crossing. He paused before the door, taking a deep breath, but it didn't help. Even the air seemed heavy, suffocating him. He knocked once, but before the second knock could follow, Hill's deep and firm voice called from within. "Come in." As Tom pushed the door open, the first thing that struck him was Captain Hill's expression. It wasn't the fiery anger he might have expected, but a cold, piercing look of disappointment, the kind of gaze that came from someone who no longer trusted you. Hill didn't speak immediately, instead staring at Tom as if trying to assess everything about him in that moment. "Sit down," Hill ordered, his voice calm, but carrying the weight of absolute authority. Tom sank into the chair across from the desk, feeling as though he were sitting in a courtroom dock. Before he could utter a word, Hill slid a tablet across the desk toward him. The screen lit up, playing a video. Tom's stomach dropped as he saw himself on the screen, handcuffing James Walker, the heated exchange between the two captured in excruciating detail. The footage had come from an unexpected angle, likely recorded by a neighbor. "Do you know what this is?" Hill asked, his voice sharp as a blade. Tom felt his breath catch, but he forced himself to respond. It's evidence," Hill interrupted, pushing the tablet closer. "And I bet you have no idea how fast this video has spread. In just a few hours, it's all over local social media. The community has seen it, and they're asking questions. They're demanding justice." Tom bowed his head, the guilt washing over him like a tidal wave. He stared at his image on the screen, seeing his smug demeanor, his stubbornness, and James's helpless frustration as he was handcuffed. The scene didn't just make Tom ashamed, it cut deeply, showing him how completely he had lost control. "Mitchell," Hill continued, his tone growing colder, "do you realize what you've done? You haven't just disrupted a federal mission. You've dragged this entire department into a public relations disaster. We're not only facing the wrath of the CIA, but we're also under fire from the media and the community. Everyone wants to know, why was a CIA agent handcuffed on the street without just cause?" Tom tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. He knew any explanation would sound like a weak excuse. I didn't know he was an agent," Tom stammered, his voice so low even he could barely hear it. I thought I was doing the right thing. The right thing." Hill laughed dryly, a humorless sound that cut through the air. "The right thing when you didn't listen? The right thing when you let your prejudice guide you? The right thing when you not only disrupted James Walker's mission but made this department a laughingstock?" Hill leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped together, his gaze heavy with frustration. "Mitchell, let me make this clear. What you've done isn't just a personal mistake. This is a catastrophe. The reputation of this department, built over years, has been shredded. Do you know who I just got off the phone with? The CIA. They want a full investigation, and they won't let this be swept under the rug." Tom lowered his head further, unable to meet Hill's eyes. His heart felt like a lead weight, each beat a painful reminder of a mistake that couldn't be undone. But Hill wasn't finished. "And that's not even the worst of it," Hill continued, his voice dropping but carrying restrained anger. "The community is calling this discrimination. Once again, the image of law enforcement is being dragged through the mud on every media platform. And the worst part? They're not wrong." Tom clenched his hands tightly, feeling as though everything inside him was crumbling. He wanted to speak, to apologize, but every word seemed meaningless in the face of what he had done. "Mitchell," Hill said, his gaze icy, "you are hereby suspended from duty, effective immediately. This case is going to the disciplinary board. I want you to be prepared to answer not just to them, but to the media, the community, and, most importantly, your conscience." Tom nodded weakly, unable to muster any response. As he left Hill's office, the light in the hallway seemed blinding, but for Tom, it only highlighted the darkness that now shrouded his career and his honor. Tom left Captain Hill's office, feeling as if the entire world was collapsing. The badge on his chest now served as nothing more than a symbol of his mistake. Tom walked out to the police station parking lot, a place where he used to feel confident every time he approached his patrol car. But today, everything felt different. The gray clouds in the sky seemed to reflect his mood, heavy and gloomy. He opened the car door and sat down, but didn't start the engine. His hands gripped the steering wheel, trembling as if he had lost all control. "I've ruined everything," he thought. "My career, my honor, the trust of my colleagues, everything is shattered." He sat there, head bowed, eyes fixed on the badge on his uniform. The badge had once symbolized dedication, responsibility, and a commitment to protect the community. But now, it was just a reminder of an irreparable mistake. Had I done the right thing? The question echoed in Tom's mind, but he already knew the answer, and that truth hurt more than any punishment could. When Tom got home, the atmosphere remained unchanged. The small, tidy, cozy house that he had once considered his sanctuary now offered him no peace. He walked in, trying to hide his exhaustion, but Emily, his wife, immediately noticed something was wrong. "Tom, what happened?" Emily asked, her voice filled with concern. She put her book down and walked over, her eyes searching for answers in his weary face. Tom sighed heavily, as if he had to drag the words up from deep within him. "I've been suspended," he said, his voice low. "The mistake I made today, it might have ended my career." Emily froze. She stared at her husband, trying to understand what could have led the man she had always trusted to find himself in this situation. "What happened?" she asked, her voice a mix of seriousness and tenderness. Tom shook his head, his eyes avoiding hers. "I arrested the wrong person, a CIA agent, and everything is worse than I could have imagined." Emily didn't know what to say. She just stood there, trying to find some comforting words, but nothing seemed enough. Finally, she placed her hand gently on Tom's shoulder, whispering, "We'll get through this, but you need to face it, Tom." At that moment, their 12-year-old son, Ben, walked into the living room. The boy, who had always seen his father as a hero, stopped when he saw the heavy atmosphere in the house. "What's going on?" Ben asked, his gaze curious as he looked at his father. Tom bent down to meet his son's eyes. Ben's gaze, bright and full of admiration, made Tom's heart ache. This boy had once been so proud of him, Tom thought, and now he had to face the disappointment of his son. "Ben," Tom began, his voice trembling, "I made a big mistake today. I did something wrong, and because of that, I might not be a police officer anymore." Ben looked at his father, the surprise clear on his young face. "You? But you always told me that police officers are the ones who protect justice. You can't have done something wrong." Ben's words cut deep into Tom. He took a long breath, struggling to hold back his emotions. "I tried to do the right thing, Ben, but sometimes we let our judgments lead us in the wrong direction. And I hurt someone who didn't deserve it." Ben didn't respond. He just stood there, looking at his father, his gaze full of disappointment. He didn't yell, didn't cry, but Ben's silence hurt Tom more than any verbal rebuke. The boy turned and walked up to his room, leaving Tom and Emily standing there in heavy silence. After Ben left the room, Tom sank into a chair, his gaze distant. The disappointment in his son's eyes didn't just hurt. It made him realize that his mistake hadn't just affected his career, but also had a direct impact on his family. The next morning, Tom decided to walk to the local supermarket. But when he stepped outside, the neighbors no longer greeted him as they once did. Instead, he noticed eyes avoiding him or filled with suspicion. An older man, Mr. Harris, who had once been friendly with Tom, looked at him and then slowly shook his head. "I thought you were different," he said softly, but loud enough for Tom to hear. At the supermarket, Tom felt the distance. A mother pulled her young son out of the aisle when she saw him approaching. She whispered, but Tom could hear clearly. "That's the guy who handcuffed a federal agent just because of his prejudice." The words struck him like a dagger to the heart. When he returned home, Tom sat down at the dining table, his head resting on his hands. He knew that to regain the trust of his family, colleagues, and the community, he would need to do more than apologize. He would need to change, starting with the way he thought. James Walker sat in his unmarked car, his hands resting on the steering wheel but not yet starting the engine. He took a deep breath, absorbing the stillness around him, allowing himself to regain his composure after everything that had just happened. The moments facing Tom Mitchell still lingered in his mind, but now they were just a temporary obstacle. The mission wasn't over yet. James adjusted the surveillance system on the dashboard, the screen showing signals from the device he had placed near the suspect's house earlier. The data indicated that the suspect's silver car was moving out of the area, but at a slow pace and showing no immediate signs of leaving the city. This gave James a bit of time, nothing much, but enough for him to plan his next move. "A man like you getting this far, it's a miracle," a former colleague had once said. But James didn't see it as a compliment. To him, the only miracle was persistence and the belief that justice didn't discriminate, and his responsibility was to be a representative of change. James remembered the feeling of injustice when he'd been handcuffed, but he had long gotten used to it. "Don't let that distract you," James reminded himself, a familiar mantra he had repeated countless times in his career. The goal was more important. James glanced at the rearview mirror before starting the engine. The hum of the engine blended into the quiet sounds of the street at dusk. He drove out of the area, his eyes focused on the screen displaying the suspect's location. As James kept a safe distance, the silver car stopped in front of an old warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The building looked abandoned, with windows boarded up and walls covered in graffiti. But James knew better. This location had been identified as a transaction point for the criminal network he was investigating. He stopped the car several hundred meters away, turned off the engine, and quickly prepared his observation equipment. He took out a high-powered binocular, raised it to his eyes, and began to observe. Through the lens, he saw the suspect, Matthew Kerr, getting out of the car, holding a large duffel bag. Not long after, another man appeared from inside the warehouse, thin and sneaky. The two began to exchange words, and James focused on recording every detail. At that moment, James saw the suspect unzip the duffel bag, revealing stacks of cash inside. The thin man handed over a laptop and an external hard drive. This was a transaction, James thought. I'm witnessing crucial evidence. Quickly, James retrieved a telephoto camera from the back seat and snapped detailed photos of the entire scene. Each photo was clear, capturing the faces of the two men, the cash, and the equipment being exchanged. He checked the images, a mix of relief and tension flooding through him. This was the breakthrough we needed. He grabbed his phone and quickly sent the data and coordinates to the command center. "Walker here," he said, his voice professional but tinged with urgency. I've identified the transaction site. The suspect is exchanging money and tech equipment. We need backup immediately to make an arrest." "Received, Walker," came the response from the other end. "The tactical team is en route. Continue surveillance and stand by for further orders." James returned to the car, started the engine, and kept an eye on the silver car from a distance. He knew he didn't have much time before the suspect left the area, but suddenly, through the rearview mirror, he saw a patrol car approaching. It was Tom Mitchell's car. James gripped the steering wheel tightly, a flash of frustration sweeping over him. He didn't want any further disruptions. But when Tom got out of the car, James saw that his expression was no longer one of arrogance or suspicion. Instead, it was filled with determination. "James," Tom called, running toward him, "I know I've made a mistake and I can't fix it completely, but I can't let this suspect get away. Let me help you." James stared at Tom, surprise evident in his eyes. He paused for a moment, then nodded. "If you want to help, don't mess this up," James said, his tone sharp but no longer condescending. "The suspect's moving to another location, and I need you to block the eastern exit. If you do that, maybe you can redeem some of your mistakes." Tom nodded, immediately turning back to his car and carrying out the assignment. This time, he didn't let any doubts or personal emotions get in the way. As James moved toward the warehouse to continue surveillance, Tom quickly sealed off the eastern road, setting up temporary barricades and preparing to assist if needed. When the tactical team arrived, James not only coordinated but also acknowledged Tom's role in blocking the suspect's escape route. Finally, when Kerr and his accomplices were arrested, James turned to Tom, his gaze softening. "Good job, Mitchell. Today, you did your part right." James hung up the phone, his eyes returning to the warehouse. He didn't take his eyes off the targets, each minute dragging on like hours. Just a little longer, he thought. Just a little more. But James didn't feel tired or discouraged. Each breath was steady, each movement precise. He had been through too much injustice and too many challenges to know that patience and focus were the strongest weapons in situations like this. Inside the warehouse, the suspects began to show signs of panic when they heard the distant sound of sirens. One of them shouted, pointing toward a rear exit. "They're trying to escape," James thought to himself. Without waiting for further instructions, he quickly radioed, "Everyone, focus on the north exit. The suspect may try to use it to flee." Just as James finished speaking, a figure darted past him, gun in hand. "Stop!" James yelled, but the man didn't halt, charging straight toward the silver car. James had no choice but to act, neutralizing the attacker with a precise strike before rushing in to support the tactical team as they stormed the warehouse. The sounds of chaos erupted as the door was smashed open, and all the accomplices inside were successfully apprehended. Tom sat in the car, his hands heavy on the steering wheel. The lingering question in his mind, who am I, if not a police officer? What had happened today had shaken his belief in himself and the values he once took pride in. James's calmness in the face of injustice, the determination and responsibility in his eyes as he stepped out of the patrol car, no harsh words, no retaliatory actions. That made Tom feel not only ashamed, but also realize something deeper. James Walker wasn't just a man wronged. He was a symbol of resilience in the face of injustice, something Tom had failed to understand. Tom leaned back in the seat, his gaze distant as he stared at the road ahead. He hadn't chosen to become a cop for power or glory. He had done it because he wanted to help people and protect those who couldn't protect themselves. But over the years, arrogance and prejudice had eroded that ideal, making him forget his original purpose. Memories of patrolling poor neighborhoods came rushing back. He remembered the wary looks of the residents, those who didn't see him as a protector but as a threat. What have I done to change that? Tom wondered, his heart heavy. Or have I only reinforced their fear? The phone rang, pulling Tom out of his thoughts. He looked down and saw a message from Emily, his wife. Ben is still very upset. He needs to know you're trying to change. Tom read the message, and his heart sank. His son, Ben, had once looked up to him as a hero, a symbol of integrity and justice. But now, Ben wouldn't speak to him. There was no longer the admiration he once had. Ben's disappointment cut deeper than any reprimand from Captain Hill. He hadn't just lost the trust of his colleagues and the community, but also the respect of his own family. Tom placed the phone down, his eyes lingering on the police badge pinned to his shirt. The badge had once been a symbol of duty and honor, but now it only reminded him of his failures. But Tom knew avoiding the issue wouldn't solve anything. If he wanted to make things right, he had to start somewhere, he thought. He opened his phone and searched for information on reform programs in law enforcement. One title caught his eye: Educational Program on Unconscious Bias and Building Trust with the Community. Tom clicked on the link and read the description carefully. This wasn't just a theoretical course. It was a journey to understand personal biases, how they affected decisions, and how to rebuild trust with communities that had lost faith in the police. Tom felt that this wasn't just an opportunity, but a responsibility. One not to save his career, but to become a better person. He clicked the registration button, feeling like he had taken an important first step. A notification popped up. Registration successful. The program starts next week. Tom put the phone down, but this time he didn't feel a sense of relief. Instead, he felt a new pressure, not from his superiors or the public, but from within himself. He knew that joining this program wasn't a quick fix to all his mistakes, but a long and challenging journey. But if he didn't start, he would forever remain part of the problem. As Tom drove home, he thought about James Walker. That man wasn't just a professional agent, he was a model of resilience and responsibility. Despite being wronged, James continued his mission, not letting anger divert his focus. Tom told himself, if I want to make amends, I need to learn to act like him, putting the community and responsibility above all else. The streetlights passed by the car window, lighting the road ahead. Tom knew this was just the beginning. His mistakes had caused harm, not just to James, but to the entire community. But he was determined to change. I can't fix the past, he thought, but I can create a different future. Not for reputation, but for the people who deserve protection. James Walker stepped out of the old warehouse, the flashing lights of the police cars and tactical vehicles reflecting on his face. In his hands, he held a bag of evidence, a laptop and a hard drive containing information that the suspect's network had used to conduct illegal transactions. Behind him, Matthew Kerr, the main suspect, was handcuffed and escorted to a patrol car by 2 other agents. The night had now fallen, but for James the light from the fruits of his mission seemed to chase away all darkness. After months of surveillance and planning, the operation had been a success. Kerr and his associates would now face justice, and the people harmed by their activities would have the opportunity for restitution. However, James did not allow himself to relax. He knew that his job did not stop at the arrest. It was also about ensuring everything was handled correctly. James sat back in the car, exhaling a sigh of relief but not letting his alertness wane. During the rare moments of quiet after a mission, he reviewed the surveillance equipment. The signal from the device near the suspect's home showed the silver car moving out of the area, but instead of quickly leaving, it stopped at a quiet street corner. James furrowed his brow, a sense of something off rising inside him. He zoomed in on the image from the surveillance camera and noticed that the suspect had not left the car but seemed to be exchanging something through the window with another man who had just approached, a man carrying a small black bag. The strange man's face was visible on the camera, and James immediately took a snapshot, sensing a hidden danger. He quickly followed from a distance, maintaining enough space to avoid detection. When the suspect and the other man moved in another direction, James realized they were heading toward an unexpected location, not a fixed residence but an abandoned area. Unable to wait for the tactical team any longer, James decided to act independently. He switched on the recording mode on his device, left the car, and stealthily moved closer to gather more information. As the suspect entered the old warehouse, James noticed two other men waiting inside. A loud noise rang out as the metal door was pulled open, revealing a space full of bright lights and the hum of machinery. In the tense atmosphere, James slipped through a narrow window to get closer. One of the strange men opened the bag, and James saw stacks of money wrapped tightly inside. "This is no ordinary transaction," James thought to himself. He managed to snap a few pictures before hearing footsteps approaching him. Meanwhile, Tom Mitchell was sitting in the empty office of the police station. The desk was neat, but it no longer belonged to him. Mementos, a family photo, a commemorative trophy from his colleagues, had been carefully packed into a small box. Beside it lay his police badge, gleaming under the light. The last time Tom held it, he felt the cold weight of the metal. It was a symbol of a career that had ended. But for Tom, it was also a reminder of the new journey he had to begin. The disciplinary hearing this morning had ended as he had predicted. Tom was fired. No excuse or explanation was enough to change that decision. But, for the first time, Tom didn't feel bitterness. He knew he had done wrong. And if he wanted to make amends, his career in the police force was no longer where he could begin again. As Tom stepped out of the station, he didn't look back. He knew the road ahead would not be easy. He had to face himself, his family, and the community he had harmed. But this time, he was no longer afraid. His decision to join the education program had given him hope, not to regain what he had lost, but to become a better person. Months later, during a community seminar on building trust between the police and the public, Tom and James unexpectedly crossed paths. James was there as a guest of honor, invited to share his real-life experience in law enforcement. Tom attended as a participant, part of the reform program he had enrolled in. Tom stood in the corner of the hall, quietly observing James on stage. He couldn't help but admire the way James spoke calmly, yet with strength. James talked about the challenges of law enforcement, but he didn't shy away from mentioning the biases he had faced, even from fellow officers. The entire room listened in silence, and Tom felt a strong urge. He needed to talk to James. Tom looked at James, recognizing the strength in his confidence and determination. Tom approached James. "James, I'm sorry for what happened," he said, his voice full of remorse. James looked at him for a long moment and then replied, "If you want to change, that's the important first step." James's brief words felt like a release for Tom, who expected nothing more than a chance to make things right. As James left the seminar, he couldn't help but think about what Tom had just said. While James had grown accustomed to facing bias and overcoming it, he understood that not everyone had the strength to do the same. He had once thought that people like Tom would never change. But today, he realized that a sincere apology, when followed by specific actions, could be the first step toward change. James also knew that change didn't just come from people like Tom, but also from how he, and others like him, stood up to create a different example. If I can do it, James thought to himself, then I can help others do it too. Tom stood there, watching James leave, his heart filled with determination. He knew he couldn't change the past, but he could do everything to rebuild the future, not just for himself, but to make amends with the community he had hurt. The story of James and Tom wasn't just about mistakes and redemption. It was a deep reminder of the value of justice, listening, and the power of change to become a better version of oneself. No matter who you are or where you are in life, we all have the opportunity to learn, change, and create a brighter future. What do you think about Tom's journey to make amends and James's steadfastness? If you were in that situation, how would you choose to act? Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments. We're looking forward to hearing from you. If you found this story inspiring, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other meaningful stories. Thank you for joining us, and see you in the next video.